Welcome to Coach Soul, the podcast where we explore therapeutic ways to the best version of ourselves. I'm your host, Steve Hudgins, a licensed professional counselor dedicated to helping you navigate life's challenges. In each uplifting episode, we'll discuss mental health, relationships, self-care, emotional well-being, and personal growth, providing you with valuable insights and actionable tips to thrive. Sometimes we'll even welcome special guests to share their experience and expertise. Whether you're looking to improve your relationships or find greater joy, you're in the right place on your journey to becoming a better you. So let's embark on this transformative path together and discover a healthier and happier you. All right, welcome to Coach So. Kenya is on vacation, and I think she takes more vacation than I do, but it's much needed with a mother and a wife and 3 kids. She's got to have a vacation. And I took mine last week, went to California, and really enjoyed being able to be out there for vacation. We have to be able to take some grounding. Vacation helps us to kind of escape. And one of the things that I want to bring out in this show, Torund Bryhn is our special guest, and welcome Torund to the show. And one of the things that we want to talk about a little bit about PTSD, how certain impacts of life can affect us mentally. And oftentimes we don't want to talk about PTSD. And veterans such as myself, I look at PTSD a little differently with them as combat stress, disorder. It's a little bit heavier than PTSD, but when you have certain life events like Torund had with 9/11, Torund, it's heartbreaking what our nation went through. And here you are, you get impacted. Kind of tell us a little bit about what happened to you with the incident of 9/11.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being on the show. And this is the first time I'm speaking about it publicly. I've talked about it quite a bit on social media as the progression of healing. What really happened was I was a staffer in Senator Hatch's office, and we were very close to the 9/11 and how it happened. So I'll just give you the rough stroke is that I was in Congress. I ended up going to the Pentagon because my boyfriend was there and I was afraid of him not surviving, and got some experience from that. But not only that, but the whole expansion of it, what people forget, and I think when you're a staffer and you see all this, is being so close to the aftershock of an event. And itself, that can be itself a tragedy, a PTSD, because you're handling so much. Like you're even seeing that with the first responders. It's not necessarily the actual event, but it was the after event, being day in and day out with grappling with the tragedy of the planes going into the buildings and creating such a momentous event in our history. So what really happened was so I'm going to go play by play, if that's okay.
Sure.
So people just get an understanding. So what happened was in the morning, I get to, I'm a communications press officer, which is someone that works within the communications, did the websites and so forth. So we had our own little departments. We always had the television monitors on. So that's one of the reasons why we were noticing right away when it happened. So I got in with my Starbucks and coffee, and
so a normal day for you.
Normal day, nothing happens. And then we didn't quite understand what was happening because the first one, I come in and there's smoke. I wasn't there for the first plane going in, but we were seeing the smoke and like, oh my gosh, what happened? And so my colleague was saying, plane hit the towers. And so while we're looking at it, I see the second one hit right in live motion and time, because we are monitoring, because when you work for Senator as a communications, you're always being ready to respond and communicate to what the topics of the nation is. And Senator Hatch being such a prominent senator who was always in the media. I mean, he was in the media almost every single day on various issues, always on. We had to always be on because we are there to monitor for him if there's something he needs to respond to, because he had such a grasp and overview of various policies that were going through or bills going through Congress. So you're suddenly seeing the building number 2 hit, and then you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? And then it's so foggy. And I think this is where some things get exaggerated and some things are not as exaggerated. And when you look back on what was the actual timeline, right? I think that's an interesting factor as well. But while we're there, then the plane hits into the Pentagon. And then you have the plane in Pennsylvania. And all what happens when things like this occurs, there becomes like a rumor mill or people talking that almost becomes true. So it expands your fear because you're not quite sure what is going on. And we had, through like chatter and stuff like that, they were thinking that another plane was coming towards the Capitol Hill. And so we were afraid of our own lives. And so it was all, and then in that motion, there was this saying, and I don't even know who said it, but it was like, we were not allowed to leave because we should be prepared to die for, and we don't even, and I think it was just everyone just panicking. But these are these impressions that you get that you're so static, you don't even know how to act. So it's almost like hearsay, but some of the hearsay gets so close to you. It's the impressions that you take on. It's not necessarily what really happened. It's what happens in your mind when something of that nature. This is me reflecting back on it. And so
I'm curious about something, Torund. I mean, here it is in everyday life of events as things are going normal. You express there's monitors going on. The Pentagon is the heart of the nation. That's our protection military. That's where everything takes place. And then what was going through people's minds, especially yours? You're looking at this monitor. I know I'm driving to work that morning and I'm hearing it. And at work, we got TVs out and we're watching this as we're working and we're just stunned. It's like the whole nation went on pause and slow-mo. What was actually happening in your mind as you're seeing this and what was going on around you so that people can have a better understanding?
It was utter chaos in a way. We didn't know what to do. And you're transfixed to the monitor. But when the plane hit, and I can't remember the sequence, but when the planes hit, like the other ones, definitely the Pentagon, and I was dating someone at the time. It was my boyfriend that had worked in the Pentagon. I was really worried. And then when the cell phone receptions didn't work, you couldn't reach anyone. I couldn't reach him. And I know that when he's working, it's not necessarily that I can reach him, but with that bombing, and I knew that he was going to be there that day in the Pentagon. So you're kind of like, oh my gosh, my whole life just turned upside down. And I don't think you can really, when you look back, you can't really sift through what actually happened and what it's the feelings and the emotions that dominate, if that makes sense. At least for me, I'm not someone that can give you a logical sequence. But what happened was, we were then instructed, the military comes into, and I don't know if it was a military guard, but they looked like military, but the guards were all coming in and they said, you all need to leave. And so I used to bike into the Capitol. Like I used to bike from my house, which was like a 40-minute ride. So that day I had my car and my bike, because my bike, I hadn't biked that day, but I had driven into the car, but I had my biking gear. And so the way it happened was you have the Capitol that looks towards the Washington Memorial. Right. I had my parking spot right in front of the Capitol Hill. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I can get because you couldn't drive. There was no way you're going to get out of the chaos of DC. So I was like, oh my gosh, I can bike. I can bike home. Right. Or I could bike to my boyfriend's place, which was closer. And so I was like, that is fantastic. And it was such a surreal Armageddon moment. Here I am in my suit and I'm walking. And the way the Capitol is kind of on a little hill and it goes a little bit down and then you're seeing towards the Washington Memorial. And so it's crazy. People are running everywhere. And you have like military cars. It's just what you see like in a war movie, right? And so as I'm walking, and I'm walking down the hill of Capitol Hill. It's like this beautiful, nice little path down right in front where there's the fountain and you can park your car there. And then you can see towards, the mall with all of the various museums. And then you see at the backdrop there, the Washington Monument. And as I'm walking down, suddenly there comes this big white van, stops right in front of me, like maybe 10 feet away. And out of the car comes all of these military men with machine guns.
Oh, wow.
Running towards me. And I was like, luckily I have my government ID, but it was just the shock of, I think that was really one of the biggest shocks for me. It was like, our lives have changed, right? It was just that moment of seeing, and it was the most beautiful day you could ever imagine. It was like the perfect day in weather, not too cold, not too hot. The sun was shining, and you're just seeing this military, and then they're like running and they run like this up to wherever they were going, right? And it was just such a bizarre moment. And I had my bike with me, and I didn't bike down. I was just walking the bike down. And so I go to the car and I get my clothing. And then as I'm biking and all these people are walking, you have women off with their heels off, and everyone's just in mayhem. And I was really lucky I had a bike. So I bike across. And so the way there's one bridge that's really close to the Pentagon, and that's the one I was biking through. And then I was seeing all these journalists that were foreign correspondent journalists, war journalists with a big camera. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to follow them, right? I wasn't even thinking. And I was like, wow, I'm not going to be a 9/11 to actually see what happens. And there's something about seeing something in real life. And at the same time, I was like wondering about my boyfriend. So I was like, well, I'm just going to follow them. So I follow them. And what happens is I follow them. So I actually end up really close. I would say I was probably the closest civilian to the bombing of where it was. And and there's like that in the middle of the road where you can just, you have the two highways, and I don't know what it's called, like the thing in the middle. And and because I had a government ID, no one was bothering me. So I was just sitting there totally transfixed, could not get a hold of my boyfriend, and you couldn't really help anyone because there was no one that had survived, right? So you're sitting there helpless. There's nothing you can do. And the first responders, there was nothing they could do. And they whisked away all the journalists, but because I had an ID, they just left me there. And so I just stood there completely frozen. And I don't know how long it was. It felt like an hour. It could have been 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I honestly don't know. I can't even remember.
But Torund, I mean, I'm perplexed because a lot of us would run away from the situation when there's fear, there's danger, there's an explosion, there's all this chaos. But instead, you turn to go back towards where chaos started. What was it about that curiosity that just, I'm going to face fear?
I think what really went in the back of my mind is if I'm actually going to understand it, I want to see it. And I've always worked with journalists. Mm-hmm. So I used to before being on Capitol Hill, I worked with a foreign correspondent, David Aikman, who's probably one of the most prominent Time Magazine foreign correspondents, who interviewed Yeltsin, interviewed Alexander Solzhenitsyn, traveled all around and had this kind of excitement to himself. And so you get kind of in your genes the journalistic perspective. And so I was the senator's photographer. So for me, it was like, can I come up close and see it? And there's something about seeing it that I internally believed possibly would help me understand, possibly heal, and knowing that my boyfriend possibly was there. There was just something that just gravitated to me. So I can't really tell you exactly, but I just followed the journalists. So
impressive.
That's what I did. And then what happened was I wanted to help, but there was nothing to do, and everyone's just standing around. So I ended up going up to one of the people and says, is there anything I can do? And she goes, you young lady, get out of here. Totally reprimanding me. I mean, everyone else was gone. Like all the journalists was whisked away right away. I was like one of the people that snuck through and was able to experience this close, really close. And then I biked to my boyfriend because he was just right up the hill from the Pentagon. And then I just crashed there and sat there and waited. And I don't think I heard from him until the following day. Or when the phone.
What was going through your mind at that time? Did you think that he was dead, or what was going through your mind?
I think when you're, and I've worked a lot afterwards with crisis communications. I worked with, helped part of on the periphery of a different terrorist attack. And so you don't really think. It's kind of like the everyday. And so what I did was I plopped myself in front of the television, just exhausted, and watched what was going on. And then I knew that the nighttime was getting closer, and I didn't want to be alone because he wasn't evidently not coming. And so then I biked to my house where my roommates were. And that's kind of what happened the first day. And then the following day, I got a phone call and was instructed to get back into the office. And so what I think people don't realize is, and we don't get enough, it's not that we need attention, because the people that were really close to it, of course, they're the ones that are suffering. But I think we forget the tertiary folks, the people that are a little bit on the outskirts that have experienced it, because I think we are not really paid attention to that we could have PTSD, we could have ramifications of it. And right. I think the whole nation had it, but having to go to work right away, having to show we were like instructed, we are the leaders, we need to showcase ourselves as courageous. You didn't have the luxury of crying or the luxury of dealing with it in that moment, right? Kind of like the first responders, you're just on, you have to get back on. And that's kind of what happened when we got back on. And the senator that I worked for, Senator Hatch, he was one of the spokespersons for when President Bush couldn't speak. So he was out there commenting throughout the whole time for the first 72 hours. So, and I was really proud. I was really proud that I worked for someone that was that courageous, that didn't leave the building, and really showed himself to be a true leader. And he stood there responding and was really a great secondary force to President Bush, who had to be in hiding or in the plane. So he was out there quite a lot. And so we came in. I don't even recall what we did, to be honest with you. It was just but I remember we were back at work, and
do you think that the sense of community with the Pentagon and the closeness of working with the congressmen, senators, and the upper military echelon, those type of things, do you think that sense of community provided a sense of strength in that moment of chaos for you?
Yeah, I think very much so. And with my roommates, my friends, I think we were all really close. And so, but then what happened was, because Senator Hatch was so much out there were allegations, or people were suspecting that he had said too much here and there, and we had to kind of like research what was actually being said so we could have the statements prepared. And so for me, I then was instructed to look at all the videos. So I relived the moments again, having to write a report on what was being said and what was not being said. And
this is because you're the press officer.
Yeah. Yes. One of the press. I was just a press assistant at the time.
Sure.
So anyway, so I was like instructed to kind of like do a play-by-play, what was being said, what was not being said, and nothing was said that was wrong. But, I think everyone gets so nervous. What I always say when I've been in crisis afterwards is that we have to remember that everyone is at possibly 50% of their capacity and probably as low as 20% of their capacity. And so in that, utilize your mind to provide a greater room, because and create processes on having that greater room. So when I've done crisis after that, really always reminding the staff, creating a process where, remember, you're not at 100%. The person next to you is not at 100%. And we need to have processes in place to understand that. So, so then that's what really happened. And then a month later, less than a month later, we had anthrax. And so I think anthrax, people don't realize what a ramification anthrax was to the people. And I would say that was almost a bigger issue than anything else, because it created a disconnection with all of us, right? So it was basically, you were in a war zone, and then you're in the middle of passing the Patriot Act, right? You've all of these big bills coming in. You have President Bush making a huge statement in Congress, the evil axis, or, he was like talking about we're going to go to war. And so you're in the midst of all of this chaos, and yet you are called to be the leader. You're called to have foresight. Was the Patriot Act right? Was the Patriot Act wrong? But there was all of this, we need to act, right? And so in that, and then when anthrax hit in the Senate Hart building, which is right above from where we were at, we had to evacuate. And we couldn't get into the building for another 6 months, because usually you don't go back to an building that has anthrax. And so anthrax is kind of like a white powder. Anthrax attack was for Senator Daschle. Then there was some of the media in New York. I don't remember. I think maybe 1 or 2 persons died, or there was like close to death. I can't remember. And then that was horrible. I mean, that was really, really tough, because you suddenly are disconnected from your community. And I think the disconnection, looking back right now, talking to you, the disconnection of not having that community, and specifically for me, because I was the press assistant, but I was responsible for the website, and we were right in the middle of redoing the website, right? So and I didn't really know how to code, so I was taught to code, and I had to do the whole thing. I was like the webmaster, as we used to call it. And so what happened was, all of us web developers were stuck in a computer lab 15 minutes away from everyone else, right? So what happened is, you're evacuated. So here you have say here you got the Capitol Hill, right next to it, you have the office buildings of the senator, and right over here you have the Union Station, right? So at Union Station was where a lot of the staff for the senator were. So you were basically having this triangle where it took almost 15 minutes for me to walk from the Senate office close to Congress over to where I was working. And then there was another 15 minutes to where some of the other staff were. We were displaced everywhere. So it was like, and then you're in the middle of, the senator being on the Foreign Relations Committee, or like close to that. You're like in the middle of all of this. Now, I was just the press assistant. I wasn't in the policy of it, but at the same time, you have this fractional thing. And then you're sitting next to people, like I was working very close to people that were from the New York faction, talking about how their family members were on top of the 9/11, and they basically died, right? And so you have all of these stories that are coming around. I think a lot what I've learned is, how much do you relive and retell, and to let it go? Because by retelling it, you're reliving it, right? There's a span there. And I think if you keep going back, that's why, if you keep going to the past, you're reliving and you're staying in your old nature instead of moving forward to your new nature, right? And then there is this component of forgiving and time and healing that all comes into all of this. And so, what did you say? Sorry.
I was going to kind of look at these 2 instances. I mean, you have 9/11 as anthrax, and it's like, do you ever have time to just stop and think for yourself? And it just seems like all the system overload. And what I try to talk to my clients about is that, my fist is the brain here. And when you have information, your frontal cortex is able to, say, and in your amygdala, your hippocampus here says, we're okay, no flight response here. But when trauma hits hard, frontal cortex says system overload, and the middle of the brain takes over and sends the signal into flight freeze mode. So I'm thinking, here are 2 episodes that you didn't have time to process or anything, but you had a sense of community here, but a disconnect here. Do you feel like maybe the disconnect reinforced this trauma that you had?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And not only that, but what you got to understand, that was a really tough year in Congress, because we worked on the Republican side, right? So you had the whole hanging Chad thing, right? With with not knowing who the president was. You're in this limbo. You're not sure what's going on. Not only that, we had Senator Jeffords who switched parties. And what people don't know is when you switch a party, what it did was it took the Republican majority to suddenly be a minority. And what people don't realize is that means switching offices, right? So like if you're in the majority, you have the beautiful big offices. And when you become minority, you have to move, right? And so what was happening is you had all of this tumultuous things that happened before 9/11, right? So like and so that was all of 2001. That was in the beginning of the year, but still it was from 2000 when we were doing the election from November, it was just so much upheaval. It wasn't the usual decorum of the Senate, right? And it was like the vitriol that I have noticed got a lot worse because before that, there was always this, like, you think of the old Greek times civic, the beautiful discussions, and it just became a war of words, and it just got worse. The culture got worse. And so You're absolutely right about that. And I think what happens when you work in that kind of environment, political environment, politics is your life, right? It's not like you get up early in the morning, 5 or 6 in the morning, you read the papers, you get right into the office, you might go to an event afterwards. Like your life, politics is not like a 9-to-5 job. It becomes part of your hobby and your life, and it's everything, right? And so I think that also propels it. And then there's always the next thing, right? So you're done possibly with anthrax, but then you have the bills coming in. You're setting the agenda of the nation. So you're always one step ahead and having to respond to what's coming in front of you. And so I just got really burnt out from being in the Senate, and I didn't like to be in a building where there was anthrax. And I was like, I really want to step away. And so I got offered to work on the House side. And
I'm on my edge of my seat because I want to know more. And unfortunately to our listeners, I hate putting a cliffhanger in here. We will have a part 2 after this because what we want to do is look at, there's always hope. We feel the impact of something that impacts us, but there's always hope going forward. And that's one of the things that we're going to pick up with part 2. How did Torund was able to overcome what she did? And we appreciate your time, Torund, in explaining to us the tragedy that has hit you. But we're looking forward to helping our listeners to understand they're not alone when it comes to impact of moments of PTSD and stress and just tragedies like this. But in this other segment we're going to do here is to help our listeners to understand that there is hope, there's healing in the process. And so until next time, take care and God bless.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Coach Soul, where we aim to empower and uplift you on your journey toward personal growth and well-being to become a better you. Remember, as you navigate through life, you don't have to do it alone. We encourage you to reach out to professionals, seek support from loved ones, and prioritize your own well-being. Stay tuned for future episodes with Steve Hudgins, filled with valuable insights and actionable tips. You have the power to thrive, and with Coach Soul by your side, anything is possible. Until next time, take care, stay empowered, and keep shining your brightest light. For more information, contact Coach at coachedsoul.com.